The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution with which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information, without the expressed written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited. Welcome back to the Nova Society, the space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by my partner in crime, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and together we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines and history. The big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what our guests and listeners have for us today. Today we welcome Metin Pekin to the podcast, and he has a new book out, Breaking Democracy's Chains. Very interesting book, and he's making the claim that one of the biggest issues that democracy has is political parties, which I don't think any of us could really argue against at this point in time, looking at the current state of political affairs. And Metin, I'm assuming that you're really talking about the United States when in your book, or you're talking worldwide.
Worldwide.
Because let's face it, over there in England where you are, you have a whole bunch of political parties, and I think the best one is the Silly Hat Party.
Well, you're right. They're all silly. The ones that we have all silly.
All right. So tell us about your book and tell us, what your thoughts are as far as political parties are concerned.
Mark, Scott, thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be on the show. Where do I begin? Look, I think many people in many democracies, you lose faith in the system. Why do we lose faith in the system? Well, we vote, we live under a democracy, we change governments, but the outcomes don't change. So you sit back and say, hang on a minute, we're supposed to be democracy, and democracy means power rests with the people, and those who govern are accountable to the people. But in real world, we don't see that. I mean, take the current state of play with Donald Trump. President Trump, the war powers rest with the Congress. And like Mr. Putin, he's calling it a special operation and sending Americans in harm's way. There are thousands of civilians losing lives. So democracy is paramount, it's important, because without true democracy, we run the danger, a very real danger, of drifting towards some sort of one form or another dictatorship. And that's the concern. And this is not just unique to the Republican Party or Donald Trump. We had wars under Biden, under Obama, and under Bush. You can go back everywhere with every party. What I've done, I've kind of looked at this issue in a little bit more detail, because in my nature, I have done a course, a BA at university in political economy. So I was exposed to different forms of governance. So I can kind of think outside the box a little bit. And, whether it was the Marxism, the surplus value, the exploitation, and what have you. So we had to debate these things. And Soviet Union was still around when I was at uni. And we were kind of observing state-managed economies versus free markets and what have you. And later I've kind of gone into business after uni. And fortunately, I've been successful in what I do. I've set up several businesses and been successful. And what that gave me is real world experience in not just a bit of an academic background, but also a real world experience for last 3 decades. And then when you look at things like politics, you look at it from the lens of the business and you say, hang on a minute, if we are voting and we're able to change parties, we're changing prime ministers and presidents, why are we ending up with the same outcomes? And why is it that the system is always looking after the entrenched elite rather than the wider public? Now, examples of that is 2008 economic crash. for a short while, banks were vilified in the newspapers, but then the whole attention changed away to say, oh, we've got to tighten the belts. We need austerity. We've got to be responsible. We get lectured. So the wider public gets lectured, while all these banks and what have you, who are guilty for the problem, are rescued. So outcomes don't change, and both parties continue that. So it's not reds or blues, conservatives or Labour, Republicans, Democrats. It doesn't matter. They all do it. So coming back to my book, I've kind of thought long and hard about this, and I said, well, hang on a minute. If you want different outcomes, you can't just change people. Changing prime ministers and presidents isn't going to solve the problem. You really have to change incentives. You have to change the systems to end up with different outcomes. So that's kind of been bugging me over the last few years. And I've kind of started reading about these things more and more. And I came across Federalist Papers. So when I've read them, something was striking, and that was how they were against factions and party politics. I think it was George Washington in his farewell address said something along the lines of unprincipled, ambitious man will subvert the will of people through these political parties. And most of them have made similar sort of comments. So once I've seen that, it was kind of a eureka moment. And I've said, wow, what you're diagnosing here seems to have been the problem even at birth of American democracy, even a problem for the founding fathers of America. So we're on the right track here. So then the challenge has just become the practical issue of what you put in place of political parties. And that's how I've begun the project of writing the Breaking Democracy's Chains.
We've said here often that in the United States, we have 330 million people. Two parties cannot address all the issues of that large of a population. And in Great Britain, over there, you have a plethora of different parties over there. And again, but it seems to be two parties always seem to be at the forefront. You either got the Tories or you got the
Labour.
The Liberals. Yeah, Labour.
Yeah, Labour.
And I think people make a huge mistake when we say the word democracy, because they seem to think back to ancient Greece, where everybody had one vote. They forget that in today's world, with the population that we have, we live in a representative democracy. So your vote, yeah, you send your representative, but as far as you voting on every single issue, which, let's face it, with the populations that we have would be impossible to make happen, we look at democracy differently. But somebody once said, and it probably is the truest statement that I've ever heard about democracy, people don't elect the smartest or the best person, they elect the best liar, which is exactly what we seem to do here in the United States. And in many cases, seems what they do in Great Britain at the same time. So if we got rid of the parties, and we've advocated here on this podcast numerous times in the United States, term limits, no more career politicians. We don't want career politicians, because once you get career politicians, you're stuck with them. No more money in politics, and I know there's a lot of money in politics over there in Great Britain, as far as support for the different parties. So what would really replace this? I mean, it sounds like a great idea. But now the question is how do you get the system that has been so entrenched?
Yes. So in terms of a couple of points you've made, if I may just cover those before I come to the answer. Yes, we do not live in Athenian democracy. The population is into hundreds of millions. We need to have a representative democracy, or to call what we have currently a democracy is kind of a bit of a stretch. And I'll tell you for why. Because we go to the polling station and cast our vote every 4 years or 2 years, and we think we live in a democracy. But The problem is this. Yes, we need representative democracy. We can't have every citizen involved. Noted. But we can have a better representative democracy than what we currently have. So in the scenario where we end up at the polling station, who are we casting our votes for? That's been pre-filtered. So we haven't got, you were saying career politicians, we don't want them. Well, here you are. The menu is narrowed down, and we just have a list of people that are loyal to the party machine, loyal to the centers that back these political parties. So we start off with a limited choice, a filtered choice. Now, the problem doesn't end there, neither for the US nor for us here in Britain. Because in Britain, what we have is a three-tier whip system. In US, you don't have a formal whip, but you have party discipline. And if you go against the party instructions, that's the end of your career, my friend. You're gone. And similar sort of a thing in Britain, or even more fiercely and more openly. Take Boris Johnson when he was the prime minister for the Brexit vote. He has withdrew the whip from 21 veteran MPs, basically more or less ending their career, pulling the party label from there for many of them. So not only that we've got a filtered choice to choose from, but also our representatives are not representing us. They're told to toe the party line. And what's even more damaging, I think it was Rory Stewart. He held a cabinet job in conservative governments, and he was saying it's a zombie parliament here because we're told which way to vote, and we press the button, and that's it. Without digressing too much, there's a added problem through think tanks who draft these legislations and so on and so forth. So before your representative even gets to vote, the bills are drafted in the way that suits the party systems and their backers, and representatives are told to vote for those bills. So we could not call that a representative democracy. A better one is possible. I hope I've covered that. I think you've mentioned money in politics, but that's a huge, huge topic. And we can start with that. But before I come to the solution, maybe we deal with that briefly as well.
Sure.
So money in politics. There's been so many reforms attempted to curb the influence of money on politics, in politics. Some of them had worked to a level for a period of time, but none of those has been successful. And I think once you've had the Citizens United case, that just kind of flooded the political arena with money, and it was, it's kind of led to where you are, or where we are, all of us, in this turmoil, in this crisis of democracy. So yes, money needs to be curbed, and I have a suggestion in the book that what I kind of termed as democracy tax. What do we mean by that? Well, democracy is a critical infrastructure. It's the way we govern ourselves. It determines everything else that happens in the world. It's the whole power. The whole tax collection goes to the government and decide how to spend it. It's the war powers. It's, government, our leaders, if we're putting our faith in them, if we are choosing those people to represent us, they're meant to be accountable to us. So democracy is that important of a critical infrastructure. And democracy cannot be left to be manipulated by these big corporations and special interest groups. Democracy tax are referred to should be implemented progressively, a bit like the income tax. And the reason for it is that it's civic participation. It's participation to donate $100, $1,000, $10,000. But when it comes to millions and hundreds of millions, surely that's not participation. That is buying influence. Let's call a spade a spade.
Manipulation.
So, yeah, absolutely. So that has to be taxed. And that money from that collection, should be pulled and used to level the playing field when we choose our representatives.
It's an intriguing idea.
Yeah. So what we cannot do is legally stop participation. But what we can legally do is tax things, because we have income, and that income is taxed for the infrastructure, for roads, for hospitals, for whatever it's used for. So we should tax that money, influence of money in politics. That's my solution to that problem. I want to come back to the question you posed to me. How do we work without the political parties? Have I understood the question correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what I've kind of worked on. And if you take individual representatives in each constituency, let's say we have an election coming up, for argument's sake, and to illustrate the point, basically we take the party labels off of the ballot papers. We're not voting for a Democrat or a Republican. Bit like the mayoral elections in Los Angeles. I think it's a city of probably around 3 million people, and 1 million people kind of a vote in that. So it's a big kind of a turnout and big population voting in that election. And there is no party labeled in that election. So similar sort of a case that can be done at every constituency. So you've got 435 constituencies to elect representatives, or whether it's constituencies or electorate, whatever you want to call it. So every candidate enters the race without filtering by the parties, with no filtering. And these people will be people who have a broad support from the voters in that particular constituency. And how we could verify that is through signatures, for argument's sake. It can be online, it can be digital, but let's say we need, as a minimum, 0.5% of the electorate to support people. So if Scott wants to be a candidate and he is able to get support from 0.5% of the constituents, that number can change up or down, whatever the realistic number is, he will become a serious contender. And there we have got a decent number of representatives. Now, people may say, well, look, parties provide queues, so I want to vote for Democrats. I want to vote for Republican values. Noted, we're not restricting. The system does not restrict people's preferences. They can still vote it, because what we will have is each representative, each candidate will put their top 10 pledges on a government website for that constituency, where people can see what they stand for, where they stand on wars, abortion, gun control, you name it, whatever the policies are important. So we know exactly whether they've got conservative values or liberal values. So the queues are still there. Fast forward a little bit, and let's assume that we have elected 435 representatives on an independent basis, and these folks are in the House of Representatives, in the legislature. So then we can begin the process of electing the leader, the president. So a bit like the local elections for representatives, now they will need, the candidates for the presidency, they will need sufficient backing from enough representatives to get onto the ballot paper, to get onto the, if you like, election, to go to the public. Now, through rounds of debates, which you guys, have in the presidential elections, when candidates debate, and rounds of voting, the representatives can narrow the list down to 2 finalists, because they're working on our behalf. They're true representatives, bit like a lawyer when we end up in a court. We don't want state to give us legal aid or pro bono couple of names to choose from. We want the best lawyer to represent us while we're in the court. So likewise, we've chosen our best representatives to speak on our behalf. They're in the legislature. Now they've narrowed the list down for the presidential candidates down to 2 finalists. Those 2 finalists can then go to public for a mandate in a general election together with their running mates. Now, the winning ticket will assume the role of presidents and the vice president, and they will form the executive. The runner-up can have the mandated role of becoming the opposition, whether you call that a minority leader, whether in UK we call it opposition leader, whether you even call it a shadow president. So both sides then can set up their teams. The legally mandated opposition can scrutinize the government, can produce alternatives to the legislation being proposed, and then the legislation or the bills will come before the independent representatives who will vote without the party whip, without the party pressure, without worrying about their future. They can vote with their conscience and in line with what they've pledged to their voters. And if the bills get majority support, they will pass. If they don't, they need to be amended so that they do get majority of support. So that form of democracy will provide the structure that permanent political parties provide. It makes the representative more independent so that they can represent their constituents freely without pressure. But most importantly, as a voter, if we do not like what our representative has done over the 2 or 4 years that they're in that job, we can vote them out. We can bring somebody else in without the fear of, oh, I'm going to let in the far right or the far left, or I'm going to let conservatives, Labour in, my vote is going to be wasted. No, there's a direct accountability back to the people, and I think that is a much better form of democracy. That's going to be best thing to the direct democracy. It's going to be more representative, it's going to be more responsive, and it's going to be more accountable to the people.
So can I just clarify, are you suggesting that we elect representatives to represent us and they go through the process of picking the president? There's not a national vote for it, but it's a smaller group of people who are choosing what they think is the best candidate. Do I have that correct?
No, they narrow the list down to 2 finalists. Okay. And then there is the public vote.
A public vote. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, there's a public vote with those 2 people. So everything needs to be in tune with the Constitution.
You have some really good ideas here. The second part is that the people are still flawed, and the people are still going to make their decisions. And I asked whether you had seen, by any chance, any of the Republican debates during the 2015 cycle leading to the nomination of Donald Trump.
I've seen parts of it. I couldn't say that I register everything that I see.
Okay.
And over the
that's okay, Metkin, because neither can we. We see it, but that doesn't mean we were actually paying attention.
Yeah.
But I will tell you one thing that happened in that, and these debates generally happen, I think, in universities. The audience is usually party loyalists, okay, who come in. A question came up about healthcare, and remember, this is the Republican debate. One of the candidates, and I can't remember who it was, said, well, what am I supposed to do? Just let the guy die? And the audience cheered, because the audience, the people, are flawed people, damaged people, hateful people. Now, I don't think this is both parties. I think this is one party. I want to be clear about that. I disagree. The one thing I do disagree with is that both parties are equally culpable or equally annoying, I guess. I mean, to me, the Democratic Party is the party of annoying people, and the Republican Party is the party of crazy people. But you still end up with the same thing. Whoever appeals to the worst parts of our human nature seems to dominate in these debates and seems to win the nomination, at least in terms of the Republican Party. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Well,
yeah, actually, I would agree with that. I mean, in today's American politics, yeah, we can look at the Republicans and say those are the crazy people, and we can look at the Democrats and say those are they're not the crazy people. They're just, I don't know. As I've said before, when I was out of the country in 2015, and when I came back, and I said to my wife, I said, who's our nomination? Who's up for president? And she said, Clinton and Trump. And my first thought was, these are the best two schmokies we could come out of. Out of 330 million people, this is the best we can come up with.
And that's why the Democratic Party is the annoying party, because they pushed Hillary Clinton down our throats.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I want to take a step back here, if I may, and
absolutely
kind of deal with this. Look, let's deal with people. People will always be people. But what you cannot say to me is that the wider public in Saudi Arabia is as educated, as well informed as they are in United Kingdom or United States. So the point I want to make from that example is that education plays a massive part in how we are being brought up. People are brought up with religious fanaticism, then they're going to end up in that camp. People are brought up liberal, they're going to be liberal. People are brought up with other far-right conservative values, then they're going to end up in that camp. Yes, there's exception to the rule always, but broadly speaking, it's nature and nurture, so that the environment that we're in influences the people. Now, it is important that we diagnose the disease accurately and correctly. Because if you don't diagnose the issue in politics correctly, the remedies cannot work, cannot be expected to work. So the diagnosis in this case, in my view, at least what I try to get across, is that political parties are a perfect host for money because they have this machine to run. They rely on donations. Historically, our Labour Party had the donations and membership money come from trade unions. Margaret Thatcher killed that because they've closed all the mines. Trade unions are all but gone. So then comes Tony Blair and he pushes the Labour Party into right and says, we're the new Labour now. And he rolls out red carpet for Rupert Murdoch, the media giants and Maxwell's and you name it. Unfortunately, in a democracy that's where representation is monopolized by the political parties, a party system, once the money and parties join together, it becomes like a tumor. It is no longer confined to the government. It spreads like cancer spreads. It spreads to other organs. And in this case, it has spread to the media. It has spread to the education. It has even spread to the courts. So our wider population is being fed this hatred and demonization of each other. So there is a great book by Liliana Mason that I keep referring to, Uncivil Agreement. And she perfectly paints the picture that what political parties have done, they've managed to fuse cultural identities with the political identities and created this, what she calls mega identities. So now we are not debating policies in a civilized manner. We are seeing one another or Democrats and Republicans are seeing one another as almost existential threat. So when we deal with the people, yes, people will always be people, but the system over the last many decades have shaped the thinking of these people. And, with the social media being available and all these hate kind of topics being pushed, the cultural differences being pushed, is no surprise that people are feeling the way they're feeling. So I reckon if we deal with the root cause of the problem, which is in this case is the political parties, then we can begin to undo the damage that's in education, that's in media, that's in other organs of the government. So that's my belief. Yes, for the record, I'm not a US citizen. I'm British. I've voted for Labour and I've voted for Conservatives. But I've realized that in a last general election, I did not cast my vote because I came to the conclusion that it doesn't make any difference because the only difference is label. There's hardly any difference between them when it comes to the key policies, whether it's wars, whether it's austerity, whether it's surveillance, you name it. And whether it's looking after the interest of the elite, I have come to the conclusion that, look, I'm not going to vote. My job now is to try to get the message out there to say, look, we deserve a better form of democracy. So coming back to Scott's point of, in 2015, Donald Trump and the debates, well, at the moment, it appears, I think it's large sums of money being donated into these presidential elections. So you've got to be viable. Money speaks. But if we have a true representative system that I've described earlier, our representatives then can narrow the list down to 2 finalists. So we are not ending up with 2 candidates that, whatever you call it, I mean, the choices between Biden and Trump or Kamala Harris and Trump, surely America could do better. Surely Britain could do better than the leaders we currently got.
2024 was an unusual circumstance because of the stubbornness of Joe Biden to get out, which Mark and I talked about for 2 years prior, that he needed to end his candidacy and allow there to be a new primary process to create a new candidate for 2024. We discussed that. We were in agreement there. Was Kamala Harris the best person for it? She probably wouldn't have won the primary. And I have to concede that. I actually like Kamala Harris. I think she probably would have been a pretty good president. I actually think that Hillary Clinton would have been a good president. But I did not support either one of them in the primaries. And so you have poor choices even in the primaries, generally speaking. And some of that is money. Some of that is money, and some of that is, at least on the right here, the influence of like Fox News, Rupert Murdoch's Fox News here is very, very harmful to our entire country and the world because it creates these almost sociopathic people who believe what they see every day on their or every evening on their TV, and a lot of them just watch the entire slate from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, watching the entire thing and believe everything that they see there, which is insane.
It is. I would agree totally with that last statement, but obviously my proposal is to do away with parties. So, in my view, they're equally bad. Really, the world will be a much better place without political party. Representation can be much more democratic, much more responsive, much more accountable. So we've got to go back to the basics. And we know 250 years ago, American founding fathers have grappled with the factions and with these problems. Yeah, so, it is important that we kind of try to break the message down and get it across to people. some people may say, well, look, great idea, but it looks unrealistic. Well, no, it is realistic because, I mean, if you take the women suffrage, women voting rights, that didn't come until 1920 in US. Some nearly 150 years after men were able to vote. For those 150 years, it was unrealistic for women to vote.
Yeah.
How else can you explain it? But now that is very realistic and should have been there 100 years earlier. Women should have been able to vote 100 years earlier.
I agree with you there, but I do want to point out the first thing that women did when they had the vote.
Yeah,
was
that is
prohibition.
Well, democracy means you've got to tolerate everybody and every idea.
That is a really bad idea. And I understand that from a woman's point of view, that it must have gotten tired of some getting beat up all the time by your drunken husband. But and I certainly understand that. However, this idea comes back to me as single issue voters. Now, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and Brooklyn, New York is a one-party town. There is no Republican Party for the most part there. It is a Democratic Party, and it has been since 1898.
Yeah.
When they built the Brooklyn Bridge and made Brooklyn part of New York City.
Yeah.
And the Republicans in Albany did that, and they've never been forgiven for it. So Brooklyn is a Democratic town, nothing but. And yet we still had many of the same problems that, the country has on the whole, because there are still so many single issue voters who care so much about one thing in particular, whether it's abortion or gun control or gun freedom, or I don't know, what are some of the other, reform and money out of, there's a whole bunch of that it could be. But people tend to gather together and try to work things out. So you're always going to have some kind of political parties. Look at the way Israel's parliamentary system works now, where you have like 15 people and they can form a political party, and that political party has to be accounted for in their general elections.
Well, now I note the point, Scott. I do note the point, but here is the problem. When you have multiple parties, like in Israel, you have a political disaster because the minor political party has disproportionate influence on the legislation, on the outcomes, and so on and so forth. And the major partner in coalition to prevent government from collapsing basically goes along with this and compromises on their own values. So more parties is not a solution, but what we are proposing here, you basically, because parties are not constitutional part of the democracy. They're not part of democracy. They're not part of constitution. So why put them into that position and fund them and recognize them as entities? Because people will have associations, absolutely. They can have trade unions, they can have single issue, they can gather around these issues. People are free to do what they want to do. And in Brooklyn, if they want to choose a democratic candidate, they're more than welcome to, because the candidate that's going to be in that area to get broad support will have to have these democratic values, liberal values. But likewise, in other rural areas where people are not represented, in any way, shape, or form, because they're a single issue, let's say abortion, but if neither party is addressing that for them, so your single issue is not being dealt with. If for argument's sake, the Democrats and the Republicans were pro-abortion, for argument's sake, and you're anti-abortion, you haven't got anybody. But if you had independent candidates, you've actually got a full menu. You've got a choice. If I want to go to a restaurant and it's a beef steakhouse, and I'm vegetarian, well, we've got a problem here. There's no choice here.
Yeah,
Look,
that would be a problem.
the spinach is good.
Yeah, spinach. Maybe the spinach is good. Who knows? I don't know.
You like
I mean,
green spinach.
here's my whole thing. I mean, you
Sure.
brought up the founding fathers, and you're correct. George Washington was against political parties and things like that. However, if we look back at the different ideologies of all of the founding fathers that we had here in the United States, there really was like 5 or 6 parties when you got done with it. I mean, you had the Whigs, you had this one, you had that. I mean, they all had different, so they all kind of gravitated to that ideology. So in some ways, the two parties basically evolved almost organically. So my question would be is if we were to abandon political parties as we know them today, which I think would be a very difficult thing because people just aren't big on change. That's like a problem for them. But if we were to abandon the political parties, isn't there the chance that something else could organically come to being worse than what we have today?
No, excellent question. Excellent question. And let's unpack that and let's deal with that. Starting with the founding fathers, American founding fathers grappled with political parties and they had ideas, but that was a very different era, because I don't think they've even had typewriters then. No television, no radio, certainly no internet, no mobile phones. So in a low information era, you need an organization to organize voters and organize government. And they were a political necessity. And that's why they organically evolved into two-party systems, because there are so many fault lines within any community. And this left and right, conservative versus Labour, or liberals versus conservatives kind of a fault line is the main fault line. And that's how these two political parties have evolved. So we can explain the history as to how they've evolved. And there is not just a theory, that's a reality, because they did not have the instant communication and abundance of information that we have today. So coming back to the second part of your question, wouldn't these things naturally arise? That's an excellent question. And I would say this to that. Let's say you are, Mark, our representative.
Oh, God forbid, but okay.
But yeah, so you're our representative under the current system, and you are part of the Democrat Party. You seem to be inclined more that way, so we put you with the Democrats rather than the Republicans. So now a bill comes, and you're told to vote in line with the party, toe the party line. And you really, really believe otherwise. You really do not want to vote for that bill, and you go against your party. And it's not unknown. So many representatives resigned, 21 in Britain against Boris Johnson's whip. They've just said, look, we'd rather be thrown out of the party than to vote that way. So here you have Mark as a representative being told what to do, and his conscience tells him something else. Now, play that scenario out under the new party-less structure. You're in the House, and you are asked to vote. Nobody's bossing you around. Nobody's threatening your career. You're going to independently vote for that bill as your conscience tells you. Would you go back to the party system, or would you rather be independent and have that autonomy? As much as people think that these will form naturally, the environment is totally different. And once independent representatives have that authority and power, they will not let go of that.
I agree. I totally agree, and I think I lean more Democrat. Actually, I'm probably socially liberal. I'm policy conservative. So Scott would say I'm probably, he might say I lean the other way. And another thing, just to clarify, here in the United States, we do have a whip system.
Yeah.
We do have a whip system. But I guess my question focuses around, you have Nigel Farage.
Yep.
We have Donald Trump.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, we have MAGA. I don't know what the Nigel Farage group calls themselves, if they call themselves anything, but they both identify as conservative. And the fact is that by the definition of conservative, it would be hard to put their policies and their thinkings into a true conservative box. They're beyond conservative. So I think a lot of the problem is when people define themselves as liberal or they define themselves as conservative, they define themselves without really knowing what that actually means. It's like here in the United States when somebody says socialism and everybody loses their mind because, oh, it's socialism. Well, yeah, we have a whole bunch of programs like that, Medicare, Medicaid, yeah, Social Security, things like that. But
Schools.
When I look at this, and this is the fear that I have, because even the system that we have now was not able to stop it. Your Tories and your Labor was not able to stop Nigel Farage. The Democrats and the Republicans, even though they knew it was wrong, and even if you listen to a lot of people, J.D. Vance is an example, the vice president, basically called Trump the American Hitler now all of a sudden they're the best buddies. They couldn't make MAGA not happen. So my fear is that even though the structure that we've got today is horrid, and I totally agree with you, it is absolutely horrid, these MAGA and the Nigel Farage group, they're worse. And are we opening ourselves up to that kind of possibility that these will gain the traction? And I just, that's the fear I have.
No, it's a fair observation and fair question there, if there is a question there. But we can deal with that. Let's deal with that. I would argue it will have completely the opposite effect.
Okay.
So let's just kind of unpack that. Nigel Farage calls himself Reform UK.
Okay.
Now and he called himself a Brexit party. Earlier Scott said one policy, people focus on one policy only or one thing that kind of makes them tick. And here is a perfect example: Brexit and then reform. By reform, he means close the borders, no more immigration, none of that, and so on and so forth. And MAGA base, the difference between MAGA and Nigel Farage is contending to become a party. He set up a party called Reform UK. Now, there is possibility that he will get into power through political parties. Now, cast your minds back to Nazi Germany. Hitler was democratically elected through a party, and he turned that into one of the worst genocides in history. 6 million Jews were gassed. The problem is not association. MAGA is a movement. You have Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and likes making America great again. Fine, we respect every opinion. Democracy requires that. As long as it doesn't turn into violence, we've got to tolerate people's belief. You've got First Amendment there, free expression, free religious beliefs, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to parties, it actually gets these radicals of one way or another into the power, near the power, and they then start taking that away from it. So the best defense against that is dispersion of power. Once power is concentrated, it's easier to capture. If you disperse the power against 430 MPs, well, MPs, members of parliament or senators, representatives, then it is much, much harder to capture that 435 independent representatives. Don't forget, some of those are not going to be like Lindsey Graham. They're all going to be hopefully decent, reputable, trustable community people that have best interest of the community in their hearts.
It's really a shame that all conversations always come back to my senator from my state, Lindsey Graham, and
I'm sorry.
it's never in a good way. And hopefully he'll be losing in November. It's just sort of, it's like what do they say? If you pick a topic on Wikipedia, after 5 clicks, you're eventually going to reach Hitler. Well, if you're talking about anything politics bad, within 5-10 minutes, you're going to eventually reach back to Lindsey Graham.
We have Godwin's law, which says that eventually you'll get to Hitler, and we have Bound's law, which eventually you'll get to Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham. But here's the thing, man. We're a bit older than you are, so we have slightly different memories than I think you do. I go back to the idea that I think it's only been about 60, 70 years here in the States anyway, where candidates have been packaged up and sold on like laundry soap. Before that, there was a system in place where you had, and it was a political party. I'm going to go back to my Brooklyn. It was a political party, and you had a party leader, and then you had lieutenants and captains spread out throughout districts, right? Usually assembly districts. And they had divisions of lieutenants of their own and then block captains who would be in charge of their block, their apartment building, their little piece of the neighborhood. And anything that anybody wanted in that block could come to them and say, I've been a teacher at the local school for 20 years. I'd really like to be an assistant principal. Or I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I'd really like to become a judge. And they would have to make their case. They would also have to work toward it. They would have to pay their dues. They would have to show up on Thursday nights and lick envelopes and stuff envelopes so that the party could get their messages out. Right? That system worked really well for Tammany, and it worked really well for the Brooklyn Democratic machine and probably other places in the United States. It wasn't quite a meritocracy. It was more are you willing to play the game? Are you willing to join us and help us? And if you do, and you're loyal enough for long enough, you will get what you want. And I saw it myself. I would go down to the club. My father was a judge, but before he was a judge, we would go to the club, the local club, Thomas Jefferson Club, on a Thursday night, and there would be people that I saw teachers of mine from the local high school stuffing envelopes because they wanted to be an assistant principal someday, or the assistant principal stuffing envelopes because they wanted to be a principal someday, or a school superintendent, or whatever have you. Everybody wanted to move up the chain. That's human nature. You want to move up the chain, right? But to get what you wanted, you had to give. And it seemed to be a better and more fair system than all you need to do is donate money and you can get whatever it is you want. You mentioned before the financial crash of 2008. It's actually happening again right now because the Republican Party and one particular senator in Texas has accumulated millions and millions of dollars from the financial sector and is trying to undo two of the mainstays of the Dodd-Frank legislation that followed that 2008 crash. The consumer, what's that thing called? Consumer board is virtually dead. And another even smaller agency was set up to monitor banks and report to the government on what the banks are doing. And the banks have always hated that, but it was important to keep the banks in line. And now what we're seeing is because of Ted Cruz, who's been well paid by the financial sector, they are doing away with the Office of Financial Research, which is one of the two entities that he wants to get rid of. And the number of money researched by this small entity ballooned up to $12 trillion.
Yeah.
all of which will be unaccounted for if this office goes away. And they're trying to make it go away. And so what we have is corruption, and it comes back, to my mind, it all comes back to money in politics being the sin of politics and the problem that we face.
No, agree 100%. But if I may say a couple of things on that issue, the 2008 financial crash happened. Why? Because of the influence of big banks relaxing all the laws and legislations, enabling those institutions to do what they did, has led to that. Subprime mortgages or whatever. I mean, we don't want to get lost in financial detail because that's not our
again,
topic.
I want to be clear. That's the senator I was talking about. It's Phil Gramm, senator from Texas. Took tons of money, went in as the chairman of the board or something like that, at Bank of America or someplace like that. He's the one who did away. Graham Leach Bliley, which was his law, was the one that stripped away a lot of those reforms that had been in place since the Great Depression.
Exactly.
Right? Well, all the Glass-Steagall, right?
So that's the proof that, money will always seek influence. Where you've got concentrated power in political parties, it will capture that much easier, because then you've got the whip system to whip a block of representatives to behave in a certain way. That's why we need to disperse the power. That's the best defense against that. So, whether it's the financial crisis, lawmakers are not holding these people accountable. And same thing in wars. Tony Blair, George Bush, they've gone to Iraq war on false pretense. Thousands of American lives were lost. Up to 1 million Iraqis were killed, lost their lives. Huge tragedy. There is no accountability. No accountability whatsoever. In fact, Tony Blair now makes millions because, like you've said, through this revolving door issues, they get promises and money and income after they leave the office by doing these favors for these big corporations. And that's further reason that political parties needs to be taken out of representation. They really are, because without them, we can have representation and money will not be able to find influence as it doesn't currently. And that's what I'm kind of trying to get across, to be debated with people, because tinkering around the edges isn't going to solve our problems.
Right. Again, you said we need to diagnose the problem correctly first, and then we can come up with solutions.
Exactly.
So to your mind, it seems that the political parties are the problem. To my mind, it's money in politics. And I would do both. I would get rid of both if I could. Again, I said Mark and I are older than you are. We both remember when there were conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans, but the parties have not sustained that. Now, if you're a Republican, you might as well call yourself a conservative with a capital C. And if you're a Democrat, you might as well call yourself a liberal with a capital L, because those parties are identical to the ideology behind them, and there's no deviation from those things. What Mark said before is true. Donald Trump is not a conservative in any way, shape, or form. He is an autocrat. He does not believe in the parties. He does not believe in the Senate. He does not believe in Congress. He believes in making up his own decisions, possibly influenced by other people, possibly Bibi Netanyahu, possibly Vladimir Putin, perhaps both, Mohammed bin Salman, certainly influential, et cetera, et cetera. But there's nothing conservative about Donald Trump.
We would agree on that point. We would agree. Look, I mean, I think I probably need to deal with a point that you've made earlier. And, in 60, 70 years ago, you've had this community, democratic community, and things worked much more like a Swiss clockwork, and it was good, and they've deteriorated. Now, there's 2 points there. One of them is we all need to belong to a community. We are human beings. We're social beings. We need to belong to a community. So without the political parties, without how the power is arranged and managed, we still can have those associations. We can still go to the local pub and be like-minded people and have a society that we belong to. So that is absolutely necessity, and that's the key to longevity. We need people. We need our community to be part of the community. That's taken, but we know we cannot stop money playing a role in politics. It has always done in the history. The rich have lent money to both sides of the wars in past. Let's not digress, but money will find its way into politics no matter what. But this is why we need defense against that money. And the best defense against that money is dispersion of the power, so it cannot be captured, and taxing that money so that it levels the playing field, because democracy is an infrastructure that we need to hold dear and look after and maintain, and not let it be captured. Because once it's captured, it captures not just one organ, it captures media, it captures judiciary, it captures school curriculum. Think tanks are being funded by these same power centers, and they're writing legislation, and our representatives are told to vote there. So there isn't a single positive thing that I could say for the parties, because we don't need them. Association is fine. You can associate around anything. It's just the legal recognition of representation should not be given to any one faction. And at the minute, we've got the billionaire faction that's dominating politics and ruling us, basically.
And not even necessarily Americans here in America doing it.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I would agree totally. Because money has no boundaries.
Yeah, this is true. And, Metin, change is very difficult. Humans are really the worst for doing change. I agree with everything that you're proposing. I truly am. But I also am a realist, as Scott will say. I understand that this is something that, although it is overdue and is necessary, is not something that's going to happen overnight. So we have to work within the system that we currently have. So to reach the goal that you're talking about, how would you reform? Maybe not reform, but what would be the steps within the system that exist that would begin to get us toward what you're talking about?
Excellent question. Excellent, honestly. And that brings us on the killer point. Nobody in history had let go of the power that they enjoy voluntarily. So let's not expect any of these machines, ruling elite, to let go of the power they've been enjoying and lining their pockets. That's unrealistic. The movement has to come from grassroots, has to come from the people themselves. And it can be done, because despite what newspapers, social media owned by the same centers, Twitter by Elon Musk now, TikTok by, is it Larry, whoever, names are unimportant, but billionaires again. And mainstream media by Murdoch's and whatever it is. So despite what these people keep pumping out, especially in the United States, there is a huge proportion of the population that do not identify with neither party. I think the research shows last year it was 45%.
Right.
So we know there is a huge proportion of the American adults that do not fit into those categories or groups that see each other as existential threat. So that is a huge hope and optimism to say, well, people are not everybody's brainwashed. Not everybody falls for that, if you like, trap that's been set by the machine. The practical ways that we can deal with this. So noting that we've got a huge proportion of the population thinking independent. Here is what can be possible. I don't know if you guys heard of Project 200 in Australia. It's not Project, sorry, Climate 200. They call it Climate 200. A similar sort of a principle can apply to citizens' super PAC. Now, as much as we hate money, we're going to need money to get independence into the representation, make them viable. So we could have in the United States a citizen super PAC that basically collects small donations from like-minded people to then focus on one or two constituencies at a time to elect more Bernie Sanders. Because we need money to be a serious contender and to give the voters a third choice. So you've got Republicans, you've got Democrats, and you have no party true representation in the independents. So we can have this coalition of independents. And given the thin margin in the Congress, if we can get half a dozen independent true representatives into that, the whole equation is going to change. And then the legitimacy, some major laws will be not able to get through without concessions. So the legitimacy of the party system will erode, and the more success will lead to bigger success, because don't forget these massive companies like Coca-Cola started at some point, they weren't the global brand they were. So we've got to start small, but what we've got to do, turn this frustration into action and into coordinated action to get more and more representatives in, to spread the message wide, to the wider public with the like-minded people, and gradually have the debate that we do not need this party system. And like the women's right, it's going to come late, like the women's voting right, but it will come. And I hope it comes in our lifetimes.
So do we all. So you know what? So boy, we do need a change. There's no doubt about it. And so last question before we have to let you go. And Matt, we'd love to have you back on, because there's a lot we have not, broken down out of this. I'm going to start reading the book too. So is that available in an audiobook?
It is. Yes, it is.
So, okay. Yes. So that's available on audiobook and probably on Amazon, I would assume.
Amazon,
correct?
Barnes & Noble, and other bookshops, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. We will put a link to that in the description. So, all right. So my quick question as the last one, and actually it's a couple. Number one, in Great Britain, do you have independents?
We have, yes. We have Jeremy Corbyn, who's been kicked out of the party system. And we have one or two, but likewise in Great Britain, we're able to get independents in, and hopefully we will get more of those in. Okay. But we need coordinated effort, like you guys have, and money still talks. So, right. But money isn't the only thing; it amplifies the message. The message has got to be right, and right. New York mayor has proven that.
Yeah. Yeah, because here in the United States, especially in the cycle that we're looking at now, coming up in November, the big group that they're looking at are the independents, because it is the independents that actually push you over the top that you have to get past, and so it's a very important constituency, the independents here in the United States. The only problem that we have here is in many of the states, you have to be a registered either Republican or Democrat to vote in the primaries, right?
Yeah.
So, that would have to change as well. Now, I take it you don't have that in Great Britain.
No, we don't. But we don't.
Okay, well,
just before you go on to the other question, if I may just say, I think you're in South Carolina. Is that what you've...
Yes. Lindsey Graham country. See, we're back to Lindsey Graham again.
Yeah, just to get right. But yes, some of the constituencies make it much more difficult for the independents. But there is still a way in that. And if we have this no-party democracy fund or movement, this super PAC, then we can get independent candidates into that race.
Even here in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham won 6 years ago his Senate seat again. not looking so good right now, but we'll see how that plays out. It didn't look so good 6 years ago, but we'll see what happens. But when we look at the numbers, even in South Carolina, he only won by 9 percentage points. That's all. So he isn't representing a very large portion of the population. 46% of the people don't like him. And I admit I am one of them. But the fact is that, I mean, the idea of your idea that you have, and this is the last question I've got for you. You're always going to have people, nobody wins, let me put it this way, nobody wins an election by 90%. So without the parties, do you think that would improve the chance of those people that maybe did not vote for that candidate to be represented, in some of their beliefs?
Very much so. Yes. Yes. This is how it would work. Look, once the no-party system is achieved, yes, it's a mountain to climb. But once, if we kind of a fast forward, and let's say we're under that system, your independent representatives will be voted maybe not by first past the post voting system. They'll be voted by ranked choice voting. So we'll choose our first, second, third choices. And the representative that we send to the Congress will have the broadest support from the community. And the beauty is they're accountable to us as voters, without the fear of, because, I mean, even if people want to get rid of Lindsey Graham for now, they are not voting for the Democratic Party for the simple reason that, they're continuing to vote for Lindsey Graham, not because they like him, a big proportion, because they do not want to let the Democrats in. And it's a tactical voting. So none of that environment will exist. None of that toxic environment will exist. It's independence, and the independents have got to command the broadest support. Yes, not everybody is going to be represented, but because we have a legislature full of independents without the party whip, most of us are going to be represented in our views. And it might not become legislation, but it will be debated. It'll have a voice in that legislature.
Excellent. There is one thing I would like to see the United States take up that the British do. I'd love to see Prime Minister's questions the way you guys have it done here. Have President Trump stand for like a pseudo prime minister's questions where people are yelling at each other. I think that is absolutely one of the greatest shows of democracy out there. All right. Metin Pekin, thank you very much. The book is Breaking Democracy's Chains, Freeing and Fortifying Democracy Against Hidden Capture. Metin, we definitely got to have you back on because there's so much more to talk to you about. And his book is available on audiobook through Audible. It is also available at Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. And we suggest that all of our listeners go out there and check it out. Metin, it's absolutely been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you. Much appreciated. And thank you for having me again.
Good talk.
Good all the best.
Okay.
Thank you.
Look forward to it again.
Likewise, thank you.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Scott Gershwer and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.